All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, gripping psychological thriller that just so happens to be disguised as an 800-page 19th century Russian novel. Seriously, if you think your family has drama, you just wait until you meet the Karamazovs. Written by Fyodor Dostoevsky and published back in 1880, this masterpiece is, at its absolute core, a classic whodunit. But, it's also so much more than that. Because before we even get to the blood and the betrayal, we've got to recognize what Dostoevsky is actually doing here. He's using a brutal murder to ask the biggest, heaviest questions a human being can possibly ask. We're talking about the existence of God, the problem of suffering, especially, the suffering of innocent people, and ultimately, how we navigate the choice between our wildest passions, our cold, hard intellect, and our spiritual conscience. Part 1, a psychological murder mystery featuring the ultimate dysfunctional family. So, we kick things off in a small, pretty unglamorous Russian town with our victim, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. He's the patriarch of the family, and honestly, he is an absolute nightmare of a human being. We're talking incredibly greedy, constantly drunk, totally vulgar, and completely selfish. He actually abandoned his sons when they were just kids, keeping all his money for himself. And now that those kids are adults, he's locked in this vicious, bitter feud with his eldest son, Dmitri. They're fighting over an inheritance, and, incredibly, they're also fighting over the love of a fiercely independent woman named Grushenka. It is a messy, messy situation. Which brings us to part 2. Meet the Karamazovs. These are our suspects. And our avatars. Now, what's so brilliant about this setup is that these sons aren't just your standard murder suspects. They are literal philosophical avatars for the human condition. Think of them as representing different pieces of the human soul. First up is Dmitri. He represents the heart. He's this passionate, hot-headed former soldier, guided entirely by his emotions and what Dostoevsky calls the raw physical lust of the Karamazov force. Then we have Ivan, who represents the mind. Ivan is brilliant, but he's a cold, cynical intellectual. His core belief? If there is no God, then absolutely everything is permitted. And finally, there's Alyosha, representing the spirit. He's really the hero of our story, a gentle novice monk who acts as the family's peacemaker and embodies active spiritual love. But listen, we absolutely cannot forget the wildcard in all of this. Pavel Smerdyakov. He's the family's bitter, quiet servant, and it's widely rumored around town that he's actually Fyodor's illegitimate son. Smerdyakov is the kind of guy who just quietly observes all this family drama from the shadows, and dangerously, he takes Ivan's darkest, most cynical theories completely to heart. He absorbs all of it, and he genuinely believes he's intellectually superior to everyone else around him. To really grasp the toxic love triangles that are driving these suspects toward murder, we have to talk about Dostoevsky's brilliant concept of lacerations. So what are lacerations? Basically, they are self-inflicted emotional wounds. It's when characters actively choose to suffer out of pure pride. For example, Dmitri is engaged to this proud, wealthy woman named Katerina. But here's the catch. She doesn't actually love him. What she loves is the idea of being a martyr who sacrifices herself for him. It's twisted, right? But these lacerations cause literally everyone in this town to act totally irrationally, just throwing gasoline on the tension. All right, moving on to part 3, the crime and trial. Who actually killed Fyodor? Let's look at how all this escalating tension, plus a desperate need for exactly 3,000 rubles, violently boils over. This timeline basically tracks the absolute worst night of Dmitri's life. So he desperately needs this money to repay his fiancée, Katerina. Why? So he can leave her with a clear conscience and run away with Grushenka. After exhausting literally all his options, he grabs a brass pestle and sneaks into his father's garden in the dead of night. We don't see exactly what happens next, but we do see Dmitri fleeing, striking the old servant Grigory in the head, and running away completely covered in blood. Fast forward to midnight, and Dmitri suddenly has a massive pile of cash and is throwing this wild, extravagant party for Grushenka. But by dawn, the door burst open, his father has been brutally murdered, and Dmitri is arrested for parricide. But then, we get this massive, brilliant twist. Later on, Ivan visits Smerdyakov in the hospital, and Smerdyakov just flat out confesses to Ivan that he actually committed the murder. But the crazy part? He doesn't feel guilty at all. He just looks at Ivan with this cold contempt and chillingly explains that he was essentially just the instrument of Ivan's cynical theories. Smerdyakov used Ivan's intellectual justification, that idea that everything is permitted, to strike Fyodor dead and steal the money. Ivan is completely horrified that his edgy philosophy caused an actual, real-life murder. He tries to confess in court, but his mind is literally fracturing from the guilt, and he just comes across as a raving lunatic. So the prosecution is able to take this perfect storm of circumstantial evidence and absolutely destroy Dmitri. I mean, think about it. Dmitri had made public death threats, he fled the scene covered in blood, he had a weapon, and suddenly he had cash. The absolute final nail in the coffin comes when his proud fiancée Katerina, who is panicking and trying to protect Ivan, betrays Dmitri. She produces this drunken letter where Dmitri literally predicted he would kill his father for the money. It's a complete disaster for him. So the trial ends in a massive, deeply tragic judicial error. Dmitri is found guilty by a local peasant jury and sentenced to 20 years of hard labor in Siberia. But here's the fascinating part. After having this profound dream about human suffering during his interrogation, Dmitri actually accepts his punishment. He knows he didn't commit the specific crime, obviously, but he willingly accepts the suffering as a way to atone for his reckless, messy, sinful life as a whole.
Which naturally brings us to part 4, the philosophical battles, mind versus heart.
Now we are shifting gears from the literal courtroom to a spiritual one. Back before the murder even happened, Ivan shared a prose poem he wrote called The Grand Inquisitor. In this story, Jesus returns to Earth during the 16th century Spanish Inquisition, and he is promptly arrested by the Grand Inquisitor. The Inquisitor actually argues that Jesus made a huge mistake by giving humanity free will. He says humans are just too weak and cowardly for freedom, that it only brings them anxiety and chaos. The church, he claims, has fixed this by taking away freedom and offering miracle, mystery, and authority instead. And how does Jesus respond? He doesn't argue back. He simply kisses the old man on the lips. Ivan's devastating argument here is that free will is a flaw that only causes suffering. It perfectly illustrates the absolute, crushing despair of the purely intellectual mind.
And this perfectly sets up the core battle of the entire novel. On one hand, you have Ivan's dangerous moral vacuum. If there is no God, everything is permitted. But on the other side, we have the counter-argument from Alyosha's mentor, Father Zosima, who represents the spirit. His philosophy, we are all responsible for everyone and everything. Zosima teaches that every single action ripples outward. We can't just point fingers and blame bad people. We have to take personal responsibility for our deeply interconnected world.
Notice how Dostoevsky answers Ivan's cold logic. He doesn't use some clever, logical counterargument. Instead, he uses Father Zosima's concept of active love. See, it is super easy to love the idea of humanity in theory, exactly the way an intellectual like Ivan might. But it is incredibly difficult to love real, flawed, messy people in practice. True love isn't just a feeling. It requires immense patience, serious self-sacrifice, and most importantly, action. There's this amazing folktale Grushenka shares that captures this concept perfectly. So, a wicked woman is in hell, and her guardian angel offers to rescue her by holding out a single onion. That onion represents the one good deed she did in her entire life. As the angel starts pulling her up, other sinners in the fire grab onto her legs so they can escape too. But she selfishly kicks them away, screaming, "It's my onion, not yours!" And the second she chooses selfishness over interconnectedness, the onion snaps, and she falls right back into the fire forever. The message is clear. Selfishness is literal hell, while true, shared compassion is the only thing that pulls us out of the fire. Let's wrap things up with part 5, the power of memory, and Alyosha's final message. Let's see how the youngest brother, Alyosha, actually brings all these massive ideas down to earth in the real world. Honestly, the immediate aftermath of this family saga is pretty grim. Dmitri is preparing a secret escape to America to dodge Siberia. Ivan is utterly destroyed by brain fever, literally driven mad by his own guilt. And Smerdyakov has ended up hanging himself. So while cold intellect literally killed Smerdyakov and broke Ivan's mind, Alyosha takes a totally different path. Following his dying mentor's wish, he goes out into the world to actively heal the broken people around it. And because of that, the novel doesn't end in a dramatic courtroom. It actually ends at the funeral of a young, sickly schoolboy named Ilyusha. Alyosha has spent the last few weeks working to bring a fractured group of schoolboys together to support their dying friend. Standing there at the funeral, Alyosha delivers this incredibly powerful speech. He tells these kids that logic and intellect are not what will save them in life. Instead, what will save them is a single pure good memory of love and connection. So what are the big takeaways from this explainer? Well, Dostoevsky is showing us that intellect without empathy inevitably leads to destruction. We saw that loud and clear with Ivan. He's reminding us that we are all deeply interconnected and fundamentally responsible for one another. He's making the case that being an emotionally messy but fiercely loving person, kind of like Dmitri, is far better than being a coldly perfect intellectual.
Ultimately, Dostoevsky's message is that life can be painfully dark and confusing, for sure, but practicing active love, that is our greatest shield.
And that brings us to the end. As you navigate your own life through your own moments of crisis or your own lacerations, I want you to ask yourself something. How might a single good memory anchor your own moral compass in times of chaos? How might the memories of connection and active love that you build today be the very things that save you tomorrow?
Please like and subscribe.